Good afternoon, fellow citizens. Welcome to the Citizens Chat Show. It's a program where we always thank you for being part of us every Friday afternoon 2 to 4 p.m. You realize there's some change in our setup. It's because of course, the pandemic that is around COVID-19. And here we're asking you, please try to follow the SOPs as guided, follow what is being said out there, the instructions from our doctors. We are following the SOPs. Everyone here is masked up, and we try to ensure that at least we social distance as guided. So everyone who is there, actually, especially those that also have lost their loved ones, we send through our condolences and say, at least let's try to be as safe as possible. All Ugandans need to be as safe. And just about this week, we're trying to go and discuss much more into the budget. And of course, with the pandemic around, we'll need to have discussions around how the budget is trying to fit into the situation around. Also, the new taxes that have been levied, the tax policy, and also try to dig deep into the 100 days of the new government. How are they faring? What are our expectations going forward? So my name is Masesa Demiano, and right here I'm pleased to be joined by my panel of my panelists, but also importantly my guests today. I'll start from here. Patrick Rubangakene.
Sure.
Yeah, he's a budget specialist with the CSBAG.
Sure.
Yeah, Patrick, good to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, then also Dr. Mwambutsya and Ndebesa is a political analyst, and with also a donor at Makerere University of social sciences. Yes, right there.
Good afternoon, listeners and viewers. I'm East African, if you want. You can add on.
Yes. Good to see you. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Then we have Sarah Bireete, of course, our regular panelist, the executive director with the Center for Constitutional Governance. Sarah, you're welcome again.
Thank you, and good afternoon, viewers.
Yes. And finally is Joseph Ochieno, UPC leadership aspirant. Good to see you, Ndogu.
Thanks for having me always, and
yes.
thank you
very much. Right into the discussion, of course. Possibly, maybe I'll start with our East African today. Yeah, we need to
today,
always. So the budget, the theme for 2021 budget is industrialization for inclusive growth, employment, and wealth creation. So just this financial year, the budget is more on projects or say programs, program based than before then when it was sectoral based. Do you think this is a good approach, and do you think this will improve budget efficiency?
Thank you, but let's first talk broadly about the budget. Unless it can only work unless you eliminate budget corruption. Budget corruption is manifested in different ways, but one of it is the whole business of supplementary budgets. So there isn't much we can read into this budget because we expect supplementary budgets. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, supplementary budgets are those monies that are not accounted for. So unless we have got budgetary discipline and avoid budgetary corruption, then all those, whether it is program-based or project-based or sector-based, do not have much meaning. So this budget, I don't think it is different from the other budgets we have had before, only that we do not have money this time around, much, even in the past, but this time, because of COVID-19, we don't have enough resources, and we are going to borrow heavily as we become more and more indebted. Borrow heavily, moreover domestically. There is this notion, which is a wrong notion, that when you borrow domestically, you seem to be borrowing from indigenous people. But All the banks in Uganda are foreign owned. And those are the ones which are going to lend government through treasury bonds. So even that one will be external money. It is still externalizing our resources through the banks which are not necessarily indigenous banks, because that's a very big challenge. So otherwise, that business of sectoral program project is just nomenclature. It is neither here nor there. We are still going to have more of the same, except that with less resources, especially under COVID-19. And prioritization already, we have already made a mistake. You see, we are prioritizing, among others, the expenditure on public administration. Bloated parliament, bloated cabinet, bloated RDCs, bloated this and that, cities and all that. That is also another big challenge. But most importantly, again, the challenge is on revenue collection in the budget, which we should always talk about. Many people out there do not know that Uganda is the worst performer in the whole of East Africa in terms of revenue collection. The revenue authorities of Uganda, of Kenya, of Tanzania, and of Rwanda, Kenya collects about 21% of the ratio of the GDP. Tanzania collects about 18%, Rwanda about 15%, Uganda hovers around 12-13%. So we collect less, not because people are not taxed, but very few are taxed. We have not actually expanded the tax base. The tax falls on a few people, and then there are exemptions. There are a lot of exemptions through state policy. So there is a very big challenge about our budget and our budgetary plans and our budgetary priorities. And we have that budget corruption. So that is what I can say broadly before we go to the nitty-gritty details of the budget per sector, per vote.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think you really bring it out clearly. I would want to try to shift it to Patrick, because you're really, from your organization, you're involved in this budgeting, yeah? And you've been following this process before. Do you think this time round, from program-based from sector to program-based approach, do you think there is efficiency? There will be some efficiency?
Okay, thank you. As Doctor mentioned, this time we are shifting from the sectoral approach to the program-based budgeting. Ideally, the program-based budgeting means we are going to group related interventions and outputs so that those outputs and interventions that score similar outcomes, we shall group them together. For example, we have human capital development. Now, under human capital development, we are looking at a holistic approach where education, health, and water are all brought together so that if they are planning, we are planning for a complete person. Note that people in the education sector plan independent of what people in health are talking about. So from what we have been seeing through and from the different engagements we have had on program-based budgeting, ideally the thinking from government is this approach is aimed at eliminating the silo approach to planning. The assumption is they want to see entities plan together on given outcomes. They're also trying to look at weeding out duplications of functions within government. So on paper, it's something which is good. What we want to see now, implementation of the program-based approach. Because ideally the program-based approach should have started early when the NDP3 started. But from our engagements we have been having with government, we have seen a delay because it's an approach which is not fully taken up. And I think maybe from next year's budget, leave alone this one, we are starting in 2021, 2022, where program-based planning and budgeting will really be reflected in our budget fully. In terms of planning and implementation, it will only be achieved, I think, from the coming financial year, because currently even all the systems have not yet been integrated. Yes, what is being presented is in programs, but now when it comes to actual implementation, integrations of systems hasn't yet fully taken shape, because when the first time we interacted with this budget, which we are going to implement in July, the first documents that came, the National Budget Framework Paper, was presented along programs. But when it came to the ministerial policy statement, we reverted back to sectors. Now, when the approved version of the budget is coming, you are again seeing allocations being aligned along programs. So that's a clear indication that that system has not yet fully taken off within the Ministry of Finance. Yeah, because for it to fully take off, there's so much that needs to be done in terms of capacity building, especially at local government level, and also the citizens and key stakeholders like civil society organizations. I believe not all civil society organizations and other stakeholders who are so central in the budget planning, in the planning and the budgeting process of Uganda right now, fully understand the concept of program-based budgeting. Because once we don't get this information right, it's also going to affect us. We are not going to keep check government effectively, because we are still stuck, like monies are in sectors. But here government is saying now we have grouped things together, it's under a program, so we need to invest more time in building capacities for all stakeholders that are involved in the planning and budgeting processes.
Thank you, Patrick. I think you give us good leads that we shall have further discussions on. Sarah, would you want to come in here?
Well, I think whereas program budgeting sounds good, I think it becomes problematic when it comes to monitoring and checking utilization of particular funds for value for money by the different stakeholders grouped together. I thought Pato would give us detail because they are deeply involved in the budget process. Before it became program budget, are in their individual budgets of these sectors are under each program? Because that is something that a viewer would like to know. Even me as a general actor who is not budget specific. By the time you say security, governance and security, you know, a problematic composition in my view is 6.9 trillion. Where does that 6.9 trillion come from?
Okay, what happens when they shifted to the program approach? Now, they look at the programs that score to similar outcomes. Then they're brought together. Now, if you are to unpack what is in security, the governance and security, there are so many votes that have been collapsed under governance and security. It's beyond the allocation, because State House is in there. We have the allocations for defense, it's in there. We have allocations for Ministry of Internal Affairs. So all that, because it's like putting the amount of money.
Is justice under that?
Not putting only money. They picked components, for example, in Ministry of Internal Affairs that score towards governance and security. So that money, it's put under governance and security. But there are also components within that ministry that could be scoring in another program. So now what government is doing, instead of Ministry of Internal Affairs holding on to that money, the money is better shifted to another program, which is under the leadership of a given PS.
Is that progress? Or it's regressive? In terms of budget efficiency, monitoring, and the full budget cycle.
It's progress, because you see, if you are to look at the whole process, there is what they call the Program Implementation Action Plan. That's supposed to be set up prior to the allocation. So all these programs set out their interventions clearly, what they intend to achieve. And it's against those interventions that money is allocated to. So we shall monitor their success against those preset interventions. So it's more about results, not outputs, because the question should, for example, in a human capital, shouldn't be now the number of schools constructed. The issue is those schools now that you have constructed, what are the outcomes? Are the learners benefiting the results of having a school constructed in an area? Because it makes no sense you having a very beautiful school, and in that school you have learners who are underfunded in terms of capitation grant. You have learners who are being taught by teachers who are underpaid, and you have a school which is not fully functional, doesn't have the basic needs to make a child there get complete education. So it's about the results. They will measure them at the end of the day, how many learners have maybe progressed, the numeracy.
Do we have capacity to follow up this really?
Now that's what I'd hinted on earlier. What is now missing is building capacities, because it's something that the direction government has taken. Now we need to build capacities for all the stakeholders to understand what is in it exactly and how best we can.
Sarah, you
Yes,
still had
of course, it's anyway. I am really arguing from a common man's point of view, because this budget is starting 1st July. So we are mid-June, and the budget will not wait for you to build the capacity. So it shows that there will be very little oversight as the budget is rolled out, if you are still talking of capacity. Because my assumption was that people involved in constant monitoring of the budget cycle should have moved at the same pace as government made this shift. Because the budget process starts 1 year. As soon as one budget is implemented, another development of a budget starts. So one would assume that as this budget was being developed, you also learned on the job, and you can easily monitor the full budget cycle implementation. But away from that, I find really the priorities not matching with the needs of the citizens. Yes, there is money in human capital development, but the biggest chunk goes to security and governance, a combination which I find disturbing as a governance actor, because our governance has regressed because of security. So when you combine the two, and I can assure you we will discuss this in June next year on this show, the biggest chunk of that money is going to go to security.
That's what I wanted to find out. Is that outcome? How are you going to measure outcome within 1 year? How will you know that there was efficient teaching and that the learners actually acquired knowledge in 1 year? In one budgetary cycle, that you are going to measure outcome, which is qualitative, which is not easy to quantify within such a period of time. Unless we are going to say, maybe after 5 years, we shall measure the different budgets outcomes and pronounce ourselves before we divert to something else maybe. Otherwise, outcomes cannot easily be measured in just 1 year. If you have provided water, maybe water was supposed to bring about good health. How in 1 year are you going to tell that the population is healthy? Within 1 year.
It would be possible if there was some faith from the previous year they were building towards that. But
maybe the experts can explain to us how they are going to measure outcomes of a budget of 1 year.
I want to invite Ochieno. Do you need to bring us something?
I must say that I'm actually the expert on this part of this issue, in a very sad way. It is actually the case that what has just been said shows that this country has actually been shortchanged for the last 35 years. I know 3 weeks ago or so, I was a guest. We discussed the 10-point program. And part of our question was whether or not this was not just a charade. Initially, when Dr. Ndebesa was introducing, I was quite mixed about it, and I totally agreed with him. Sarah's submission, and indeed our budget expert colleague, confirms a conversation I had with a friend of mine, a lawyer, as we were coming on air. And it was about Kampala planning. And the issue was whether or not, if within the premises, the studios, we wanted to erect a building up the structure by one floor, we just go ahead and do it. And I was saying that normally for cities, there would be need for planning permission, even if it's your private property. And it's because the local authority will take due consideration of what the national regulation state, take into account who your neighbors are. And I gave this person an example of what happens in Zambian towns when they grow. And actually, I picked Zambia as really was one of the worst examples. But you can imagine Lusaka being better than Kampala. And the argument was this, that if you want to start up a housing project in Kirinya, private, you do the allocations, erect the structures, but you know whether it is a Ochieno Bireete estate or it was Kampala City Authority, it will be the case that you open up the roads, take electricity, take water, have due consideration how far that is to other places. Are there going to be provisions for shops? Might there be need for a school or a health facility? These are basic common sense. Now, the idea of being brought in, quote, by the state about this program approach is a commonsensical thing that perhaps, Demian, you might have to work very hard to invite on this program somebody from the Ministry of Finance, somebody from the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, whatever they call these days, or maybe somebody who's responsible for the Ministry of Local Government. Because what really we're being told is that we're just basically changing that you've got 3 children, and then you give them their pocket money for the week, going to a local day school, and all of a sudden you've decided that, well, you're not quite sure how they spend, whether or not they spend on sweets. And here what we want to try and do is that make sure that I control the money, and then I determine whether you get sweets or bananas. I know it's a bit hot and a bit sweaty, but I think we'd rather do that than keep social distancing than actually play irresponsible on television. Citizens keep watching and keep playing responsible because COVID is real. So really, in terms of where we are on this, I think it's a very fine process. Much as in principle it would make sense, I don't see how a system which has not been used to joined up working in the last 35 years is necessarily going to be able to do it. And actually, I don't know, both Professor and Sarah raised this point. How do you monitor this within 12 months? That because it's obviously common sense. You built a school, you're trying to build capacity in it. What about the health facilities down there? What about integrated transport to make sure? And here, forget about Kampala. Let's talk about somewhere in Tenjero, that children are able to transport themselves to school. Who's going to be responsible for making sure that actually they get school meals? Which aspect of the authority is actually going to be able to subsidize the school meals? What are the underlying issues for non-performance or non-failure or underperformance of children in schools in those particular areas? Things like that. So I think some guys thought within government, maybe even some of our donor friends told them this, and as usual they woke up and very big things who came with a big idea, like Mr. Museveni came with this idea of the center of gravity thing, and say we are now going to move it from sector budgeting to programs. And I think it's all a fine thing. Like Professor said, I don't see really by and large difference, except that has actually exposed the fact that we've been shortchanged 35 years.
Interesting. Sarah, you want to add?
No. I think really, to me, what would be important is because as people who work on budget oversight and monitoring, you need to be able to track funds and trace whether there's value for money for a taxpayer. I think that's what, and then budget efficiency and delivery. So once you are not able to do that as the budget rolls out, if people, my worry is if the budget experts now need the capacity, which might take another 1 or 2 years, then who is going to do that? But the part of
Doctor talks about mismanagement.
Of course, we do not have fiscal discipline in this country. A budget before it's approved, even in the first 1 or 2 months, save for this period where we have a pandemic. But the culture of President Museveni's government, in the first quarter, there are about 3 supplementary budgets. Then what did you budget for if you are not sure of what you want to do? And that practice should be condemned.
And in most cases, the supplementary budget is not even on issues that have just come up, like the pandemic came up suddenly. No, it is the usual issues which have been there, and all of a sudden there is supplementary budget. Now, with that fiscal indiscipline, which I call actually budgetary corruption, then I don't know whether we are doing budgeting or we are just typically traditional, we just do things according to the whims of the individuals that are involved in managing society, not based on... Our budget is like our constitution. We change the constitution anyhow, anytime, any minute. Similarly, our budget is just for a show. Otherwise, the actual implementation ends up being the whims of those who are in the corridors of power. And by the end of the budget cycle, we are not normally given how the previous budget performed and why it performed this way or the other one, and why there was a supplementary budget and or not, and why supplementary budget in certain sectors and not in others. That is what this time we need to know, so that we question that allocation as well as the way those funds are used. Otherwise, we simply say this will be allocated this will go this will go this, but in the middle, not even in the middle, in the first quarter, the indiscipline has already set in. Now, with that indiscipline, there is nothing like a budget. Maybe there is another term used for such a thing.
Patrick, I know Patrick is fixing the corner now. Patrick, you see now. I know. I possibly I would want to ask whether the interventions that possibly CSBAG and other actors around the budget have done into ensuring that government possibly at one point starts accounting to us on how the previous budget has performed. I don't know. But before you answer that also, I want to go deeper. The economy has been struggling, yeah? And from the first wave of the pandemic. And now we are into the second wave. And looking at the budget, do you think there are focused interventions that are specific on saving lives and also possibly keeping the SMEs afloat as well?
Okay, thank you. Maybe I could start with the first question about performance of the economy and maybe what has CSBAG done in regards to that. Yes, as CSBAG, we are centered more or less on advocating for a budget that is people-centered. And for us to do that, it involves engagement with the common person. We engage with the ordinary citizens. We equally have spaces where we engage with government and the Ministry of Finance. And I must make a disclaimer that with advocacy, you don't achieve instant. It's a gradual process. We could advocate for something today, and the success could come maybe years to come, not now. So, in terms of the budget performance, the Ministry of Finance releases the semi-annual budget performance report and the annual budget performance report. It's a public document which they always release. At exactly 6 months, they'll release that performance. Then, at the end of the financial year, they also release the performance. And if you look at that document, some of the key issues that you really see coming from the semi-annual or the annual budget performance is the issue of absorption of funds. Funds are allocated, appropriated to a given sector, program, name it. But when we follow through that cycle, what shocks us and even Ugandans is we cannot absorb all the funds that has been given to a given entity to deliver services. And this absorption is even worse when it comes to projects. Remember, most of the projects that we implement in this country rely majorly on borrowed money. Government just offer counterpart funding.
Makes it more serious, yes.
Yeah. So you see projects limping from the start, and yet some of the issues that has led to poor absorption comes right from the planning of a given project. For example, let's take a road project. Government could say we want to build a road from point A to point B. But in most cases, we go and even borrow for that road before doing the nitty-gritties. We haven't settled the issue of maybe compensating the project-affected persons. We haven't even provided, because there are some of the projects where they say government should provide counterpart funding. Such is not there, but we have already rushed to borrow. Another issue that affects it is disbursement. There are delays in disbursement of these funds. So once you put all this together, definitely absorption is going to be affected. So now those are some of the challenges that over the years we get to see. Especially one critical challenge is public investment management. It's quite poor. So unless such is addressed, we are not going to see the budget performing the way it's supposed to perform. Now, when you look at the unspent balances, that comes because at the end of the year you see how much money is coming from a given local government, from MDAs. Now, some of these monies revert back to the consolidated fund, majorly because of delays in procurements. The process is so tedious, and the back and forth, money reaches these entities late. At times money reaches early, but because they have not done the processes as is supposed to be done, the financial year ends and money reverts back to the consolidated fund.
And in a way, so sorry, that's exactly part of the point that Sarah was talking about. In fact, when Sarah was talking about capacity building, I was actually being not really dismissive, but simply saying that, well, it's much more than capacity building. But on that is precisely capacity building. So how is this going to be resolved as a result? Actually makes it worse. Do you know how? It's going to make sectors begin to blame one another, each other. It's education, it's health. The obvious example you gave about roads, it is actually not even about planning. One of the first things to do about major projects like this is consultations with the public, environmentalists, communities, related local authorities that these projects are going to be passing through or are involved. Perhaps cultural organizations and institutions, many of these ones that these days these guys have actually created around. Many of these are actually real common sense. In fact, another disclaimer, when I was actually claiming expertise, I didn't actually say I was claiming it from a point of view of a political basis rather than the fact that my colleagues are actually less on it. So these are basically, it is political leadership in this country and a lack of political direction. And I think like Dr. Ndebesa said, it's about budget corruption. And unless we deal with the underlying issue, these are the things, you're just going to go round. And actually I worry. At the beginning, actually, I nearly thought because of need for interagency working as a state, that the program process would possibly be an easy one. But when you actually give us some of the challenges being faced at the moment, it worries me slightly more that actually we are going to a fight process which is actually going to make the entirety of the process actually quite sink.
No, but also drawing examples from what the budget committee experienced in the last few months. You find the finance is budgeting for an activity 15 times. The ministry is budgeting for an activity 21 times. Because a budget process starts from a departmental, user departmental level. Yeah. By the time you reach the extent of taking what you think is a final budget to Parliament, and there are these multiple entries of a similar activity, doesn't that also drive us to some of the money that returns, and isn't that intended budget corruption, like Dr. Mwambutsya said?
Yeah, partly it contributes also to the budget performance. So there are so many factors, as we put it, so many underlying factors that once addressed, we could achieve budget efficiency. There are so many factors here.
Okay, now I want you to address yourself to the other issue of whether the budget has been a little critical in looking at interventions that are going to save lives, but also trying to keep the SMEs moving, because you see, lost a full year without operation, really.
Yeah, when it comes to what the budget is speaking to the SMEs and in terms of saving lives, I think one critical intervention that has come out is the 500 billion from which has been allocated towards vaccines, procurement of vaccines to vaccinate Ugandans, because you see COVID has hit this country so hard. And to me, yes, it's a starter, because that money is not enough. It's not adequate to cover, because we have so many Ugandans who have been impacted by COVID. And the sooner we vaccinate everyone, the faster our economy opens and we start rebuilding. So that's one thing that is in the budget that's stuck towards COVID. And it will benefit also SMEs. Something that has come out in the budget that will also benefit SMEs, mainly the medium size, not the small one. The medium size is the capitalization of the Uganda Development Bank, I think by 103 billion. Yes, that money, access to it could be a challenge, but it has already been allocated. So we need to get to work with these SMEs so that they get to understand the modalities, how they can access the money.
Do you have an idea about the criteria?
The criteria, as for one, I don't have, but I believe it's there with the ministries and it can be shared and made public.
Are you drawing lessons from what happened a few months ago for money for businesses in the first phase of COVID?
No, this is a government allocation. So, Sarah,
even the other one was a government allocation to UDB.
You see, for us to really have a discussion, because now the way you are putting the gun at me as if I'm the government itself.
No, you are not the government. Yeah. We are not throwing guns at you. We are asking for your perspective as a person who monitors budget. We are not putting you on the spot, Pato. We want to know if you have interacted with these aspects as a person who consistently works on the budget issues. That is all. Whether you've worked on it or not is another matter. Yes. But you are not on the spot.
Okay, thank you. I have that protection. Yeah, because I may sound as
a
government person.
No, and you don't need to. You don't need to.
Yes, so I'm also giving a perspective from our side and what really needs to be done to make it effective. Yes. There were issues that came out in the UDB allocations previously, which the call should be, we need to dig deep and investigate what went wrong and what needs to be done right. Because if that is not keyword, the same could still happen with these allocations that we are giving, the 103 billion. We could still follow a similar trend. Let's look at, for the small-scale people, there are provisions that are put for them under Myoga. There are allocations where government intends to support, especially people working in saloons, carpenters. So those are some of the opportunities for them. So we need to see our citizens speak interest and form these groups so that they can benefit from Imyoga. We have the youth livelihood programs. It has also been allocated funds, and UWEP program targeting the women. So as SMEs, there's also another issue that came in, restructuring of loans. There's that opportunity, though the deadline is set by 30th September. Those who have really been deeply hit by the COVID pandemic, they can go still restructure their loans because Bank of Uganda has given that mandate to banks to renegotiate and restructure loans for those businesses that have been impacted, though the deadline is by 30th of September. So you can see, yes, there are some interventions that are targeting to ease the pain that COVID has done into the economy. But what we really need to be critical of as actors here is value for money. Allocations are done. But the question is, does the common person at the end of the day benefit from that allocation? So that's where we need to put much more effort and energies. Yeah, because where there are glaring misappropriation and corruption, we need to raise that alarm and put it to government.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So right there, we're talking of value for money. This budget, looking at possibly the NDP3, does it fit into the NDP3? But also, when we are trying to get out the issue of public expenditure, we are seeing that you talked about security literally eating almost the lion's share. Are we getting our priorities right?
You know, Demian, we need to remind viewers that when there was a COVID outbreak last year, government passed a total of 11 point something trillion for COVID money to prepare for the pandemic. But as we talk today, people are dying for lack of oxygen. People have no provision for medical care, and I don't know whether there was value for money on those exorbitant expenditures in preparation for COVID pandemic. Also, what was amazing in that process of numerous supplementary budgets was that the biggest allocation for COVID was going to Security and State House, as if those were the most important hospitals. Because we are talking of a health crisis, but you take money to State House and Security. So drawing from that experience, and we are calling on government to review the budget and create funds for now the second wave of COVID, which is more problematic, especially given that the first money for COVID was largely abused. So as we review, as people were making the budget, knowing there is a global pandemic elsewhere, no country has been declared safe, they still budgeted as if Uganda was free of COVID. So that shows you the mismatch between citizens' needs and priorities and the mind and thoughts of our technocrats. The country is still under pandemic. Your country is under first wave. You are watching third wave. We watched third wave in Kenya as this budget was being done. But you do not plan for that kind of pandemic. And as we talk today, yesterday we lost 39 people, 30 for lack of oxygen in Murago. National Referral Hospital, main treatment center for COVID, no oxygen. So, is this a budget that even a citizen should discuss? 44.3 trillion with no consideration to save lives and specific intervention on livelihoods. Because the pandemic has posed two economic challenges. One is economic resources needed to save lives, but also economic resources needed to save livelihoods. This should be the major key issues, and until the world is declared COVID-free. But you can't see that in our budget. No.
It's not clear. Joseph, of course, you are our senior planner today. What are your thoughts in this line?
I was just grandstanding. And you'll be surprised to hear this from me, from the political perspective, you know? And that is, in politics, guys in opposition, Mr. Museveni shouldn't smile about this, generally. When big things happen, the opposition will always talk as if they've got the magic one for the answer. So that's sort of not the context. Now, on a very serious note, I think Sarah Passoff sort of really wraps this aspect of it. But there's a point about this SMA issue. I wish this program were watched by a majority of the citizens, and I think they should get interested and watch more of it, because I don't know whether there's any other network that discusses some of these things like we do, and thanks to yourselves. Because clearly, until today, it hadn't really struck me this much about this more recent allocations for SMEs. And then I was thinking, how many of them know about it? What has the state done? What effort has been made to let people know about it?
Even those who know, do they know the criteria?
I was coming to that. What is the organized criteria for this? Who is really going to be able to make sure that this money actually reach the intended recipients? These very basic questions. Who is actually going to monitor these things then at the end of the day? That this was the spend, this was the take-up, and this was the balance, and how has it really performed? And yet the country is genuinely, really struggling. I got an email yesterday from a public servant married to a public servant not an email actually, a WhatsApp message, and unfortunately I just got it before coming to air. And these are young, fantastic couple from officially part of the richest part of the country without prejudice. I'm making a very important point, but they're public servants. And one of the couple actually says that partly because of the job that they do and the public job, they're not earning, and actually they don't have food. Now, these are not below average to lower end of the age of citizenship.
What kind of institution do they work in?
One of them is actually a teacher. One of them is a teacher, and the other. So they're both public servants. But and so after this program, I'm actually going to. In fact, I sent a note that I'll send them when I get a moment, something to keep them going for one day. So these are for public servants. So really, the majority of many of the other people who may be struggling, who are in private business, and actually you said so earlier, Patrick. This thing about were you when I think part of the conversation we're having maybe with Sarah privately is about the uptake for in terms of taxations. So some of these SMEs, because it's another separate issue, some of these guys may be below the radar for partly because of deregulation, the way things are now. How many of them are within the radar? How many of them are structurally organized? How many of them are possibly already paying taxes? And how many of these are going to meet the criteria? Maybe some of these guys are fearing, saying that, well, maybe if I go and make approaches for this, they're going to ask for my tax returns, things like that. So I think the authorities need to know that this is not really a matter for these SMEs, that many of these organizations will be employing many people, and many of these people who are employees are basically heads of households, and many of these are actually parents of children who will be struggling in communities. So it's a very serious issue. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Possibly, now that Doctor is seated, so just let's have a short break right there, and when we return, we're going to dig just a little into issues of taxation, a little. Then, of course, fall back into the 100 days of the new government. Kindly, this discussion is streaming live on our YouTube channel, Civic Space TV, on Facebook live. Also, we're there, but also on Twitter. Our hashtag is ChatShowUG. ChatShowUG. Kindly, as usual, post there your comments and your thoughts, and we'll pick them up and at least share with the rest of the citizens to learn from. Be part of us, and let's have a short break and return. Thank you.
The Citizens Chatroom happens every Friday at 2 p.m. on Civic Space TV Online on Facebook and YouTube. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Civic Space TV, freedom always.
Thank you very much. Welcome back from the short break. We are still discussing issues around the budget and, of course, the taxes, new taxes, and the 100 days of the new government that we have today. On the panel, of course, we've had we still have our guests here. Patrick, you're welcome again.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sarah, Ndebesa, and Joseph. Welcome back from the short break. Yeah, we maybe. Ndebesa, I need us to just say something small before we get into taxes, yeah, and the other discussion. The service sector is one of the biggest contributor to our GDP, about 44%, yeah, and of course it is employing majority Ugandans, and mainly could be the young people in the entertainment, in transport now, that is closed over the district closures. Then you have in the education, almost about 20 million Ugandans are in the education sector. Are you seeing any efforts around currently to see that this sector recovers?
Thank you. You are right, the services sector, when you consider the three major sectors of the economy, that is the industrial sector, the agricultural sector, and the services sector, the services sector actually contributes, I think, even more than 44% to the GDP. Contrary to the popular belief, they think agriculture contributes much. Actually, agriculture contributes between 22 to 23% to the GDP. And when it comes to revenue, corrections in terms of tax payment, I think agriculture contributes about 1% or even less than 1% the national treasury. So the most important sector is the services sector because industry contributes about 27%. Now, the services sector is the one which has been hit hard by COVID-19. And therefore, the state needs to put more efforts and priority to the services sector, which employs many people. Of course, agriculture employs more, although it doesn't contribute much to the GDP. But the services sector needs to be revamped. And therefore, there must have been very strategic thinking efforts and planning to see how this services sector can be revamped so that it contributes its necessary contribution to the national budget. Now, in terms of taxation, it contributes a lot also. Now, without the services sector, I can see the revenue correction this time going down very drastically, and the state will just survive on borrowing both domestically and externally. So that is the fate of the services sector. But the services sector is also slippery in terms of tax correction. If the revenue collectors are not so sophisticated, that is a sector where the revenue can also be hidden. And some of the big service sector contributors like telecommunication companies, like fuel companies, like the banks, are more sophisticated, and some of them actually have registered offshore. You remember this concept of tax havens, where people register outside and therefore they pay some of those taxes outside and not in Uganda. And we have this revenue outflow, financial outflows. That's why Uganda collects less than most other countries in the region in terms of ratio to GDP, because the policymakers and the revenue authority, the tax collectors, have not focused much on closing those gaps through which there is financial outflow. But there is also this business of double taxation agreements. They need to be revisited, where you find some people say we pay taxes in Mauritius, we don't pay taxes in Uganda, and you have had a double taxation agreement to avoid taxing people twice. And those ones should be closed, really. We shouldn't sign these double taxation agreements. So we should revisit them so much so that there is no financial outflow. Otherwise, in Uganda, there has been a lot of financial outflow through those double taxation agreements, which are very complicated. I wonder how many of our MPs would understand that concept of double taxation agreement, and they would pass the necessary legislation to close those gaps. They need to be maybe educated. There is now, I think, the Department of Research and Information in Parliament. It needs to do a lot to our MPs, because some of our MPs, of course, are average people who are from up country.
Description for them. But
yeah, it is not easy to understand concepts like double taxation agreements or this whole business of tax havens. Just go and ask an average MP, what is a tax haven? What are Panama Papers? You remember Panama Papers? He will say Panama is a canal somewhere between North America and South America.
we had a long discussion on fiscal policy at some point in Uganda.
So those are complicated issues.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Professor. And, Patrick, what do you have to say from your approach and your area of work?
I think what we haven't really put the spotlight on is the revenue side. Most Ugandans and even civil society organizations, most of us are taken up from the expenditure side. A budget has two components, the revenue and expenditure. Yes. And majority of us focus more on the expenditure and they leave out the revenue. And it is the revenue that funds the expenditure. So if you look at this current budget, and you look at the projections that URA wants to collect, is around 22 trillion. Now,
Out of 44.
out of 44.7
yeah.
trillion, you see,
So more than less than a half.
actually
is what is going to be
it's
collected.
close to 50%, because 22 and 44 is almost 50%. Now,
What's the performance rate? How much do they collect in percentage terms?
in terms of performance, if you look at their, as of April, I think they made a shortage of 1 trillion.
Okay, but out of this 22 trillion, I think a big chunk is going into debt servicing and debt payment.
No, this is still collection.
Just projection.
They are projecting to
They
Projection.
never
collect.
hit 20 trillion. That's the idea.
They will not
trillion.
hit that
They'll not
target.
hit 20 trillion.
It's a projection.
Yeah, it's a projection.
Okay.
But trust me, if we are to sit again next year around this time and we evaluate, chances are URA will not get that 22 trillion.
No.
There are so many factors that most likely will contribute to URA not getting the 22 trillion. One is tax awareness. There are so many taxes that come on board, and not each and every citizen who is supposed to pay tax gets to know. Most of the awareness we see from URA is centered within Kampala metropolitan and the major towns. But if we are to go beyond, remember now we have so many districts that we have created, and we are still generating more. So now the question here is, how many Ugandans are knowledgeable about tax and why they should pay tax? We are good at demanding. We are saying our roads are poor, no drugs in health facilities. But now we need more from URA also to come and create awareness and say, this is what you need to do as a responsible citizen. Pay your tax. But as we pay, we need to see also service delivery improve, because that is the bet, something that makes someone feel the urge to pay tax. I can't go pay tax, and yet I'm seeing so much leakages from the taxes I'm contributing to. So there should be a balance. On expenditure side, we need to see efficiency and quality services. Then it will be very easy for URA on the other side to go and mobilize Ugandans to pay tax. Now the question is, which people are URA targeting in terms of their tax measures? If you look at the tax register, it's around 1.5 million Ugandans. In the tax, that's now the non-individuals and the individuals. The companies are all in, that's 1.5.
That's direct tax.
Now those are the people who bear the biggest burden of the direct tax. But ask yourself, do you think it's only 1.5 million Ugandans who can contribute to that? I think we are way more than the 1.5. But attracting and bringing more Ugandans and the companies into the tax bracket, because most of these businesses in Uganda are informal. So we need to make them first formal and bring them. Then now the question comes, how are you going to attract them? Like in this financial year, URA has come up with a measure saying no one should be given a license to operate a business when they don't have a TIN number. Now, if you start linking that with a common person who runs a kiosk, and you're telling that kiosk person that you'll never get a business license until you have TIN. Now, the challenges of even how to file returns, this kiosk person may not have an idea about it. I see. So, to me, I think we needed to first create that awareness. Let people get to understand what is TIN even, for example.
Yes. But can I bring in another angle here? The big question here now is tax justice. Tax justice. We should be mentioning that in our budgetary processes and our budgetary debates, tax justice. You know, agriculture is not taxed. I am not advocating for a peasant who produces a few tomatoes to be taxed. But you imagine a situation where somebody sells a lorry of matoke every month or half a month.
Per week.
A lorry of matoke does not pay tax, but somebody who earns 300,000 shillings a month pays tax. Somebody has got 100 Frisian cows and is selling about 4 jerrycans of milk every day, but even one cow of those Frisian can be bought at 3 million. He's not taxed throughout the year. But you just go for somebody earning 500,000 a month and you tax that person. That is tax injustice. So the policymakers, which is the Ministry of Finance, together with government, they need to look at the question of tax justice. Because at times they feel that they shouldn't tax those rural people, not necessarily peasants, because that is where they get most of the votes. So they go for the urban people whom they know don't normally vote them. And you leave out a big chunk of untaxed sector. You are selling a roll of matoke and you are not taxed. Or you have some people have got actually 2,000 cows. The president has told us he has 2,000 cows. How much tax does he pay?
He never pays tax.
Anyway, for him, he's not supposed to pay direct tax
Can you
anyway.
imagine lucky guy?
So he's a business person. Yeah.
But the point I'm making here for the viewers and listeners to take note of, and for the civil society and actually citizens to think about, is a question of tax justice when it comes to tax collection. Let the tax not fall on the shoulders of very few people, and others are even exempted. And there are very many companies which are also exempted from tax payment, and it is by the stroke of a pen, either the president or the minister exempts somebody. Nobody has discussed it. Members of parliament have not discussed. Why do you exempt him and not him? Why do you exempt X and not Y? And that is where tax injustice as well as tax corruption also begins. Because there is a lot of political patronage. There are those who pay tax and there are those who are exempted officially. That's what we call official corruption. That's what we call political corruption. That some people pay tax and others are exempted. And on the premises that are not really very clear, other than that so and so is a regime supporter, maybe the other one has got divergent views. Not necessarily opposition, by the way. Just having divergent views from those of the official views constitutes a crime, and you will be heavily taxed, and the others will not be taxed. You know,
taxing your freedom
the regime indirectly is actually killing the private sector, which is supposed to spur development. There is a lot of tax falling on shoulders of few, and those few sometimes have divergent views or they have independent views. You get independent views, your business is killed. Somebody who is a regime confidant and sycophant is exempted from tax. I have been told, you can go and find out, especially from Kasita, they are the ones who follow these things. There are certain businesses and certain business people connected to the regime who actually exempted tax, or even revenue authority does not follow them up. And if you are selling something together with such a person, and you discover your goods are not being bought, but someone is always importing and his goods are going, you go and check. You find that person does not dodges certain taxes or is exempted from taxes, and the others are paying tax, and you run away from that business. So many people are running away from businesses that are run by government-connected people. The question of tax justice should even be a political question. It should even be a campaign question, that we either all have the burden of taxation or it becomes a costly thing to have tax injustice. That's when the regime will wake up and make sure that it works on tax justice. Tax justice is a very important thing.
Joseph, you want to chip in?
I was just going to say that, well, what other space than civic space where you get such an observation and one from Patrick, but more importantly that indeed that the lorry full of matoke, the nearest the owner of the matoke may get off with some few shillings, is possible at some roadblock for 10, 20,000 shillings. Number one. Number two, just as we are saying on this program, you will be very, very surprised that no civil servant, and this is official, challenge us back on this program. No civil servant has ever given a thought. So as we were saying at the beginning of the program, that if really these guys care, somebody from Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, whatever they call these days, or somebody from the Ministry of Local Government, should invite themselves to a show, and they have this conversation with the citizens.
And have a threshold. We are not saying everybody who is producing matoke or beans should be taxed. But you get a threshold, like those who are earning salaries. You say, once you have 10 acres of bananas, or you pay. If you have more than 10 cows, especially Frisian cows, exotic cows, you pay. Those who have less, they don't pay. But for you to sit and say, even when you have 2,000 cows, you shouldn't pay tax, and you are one of the richest people in the country.
Yes, but
it's
I don't know whether under this particular regime you can tax cows. But
I don't know about that.
Sorry, you have cows. Me, I only have one. Now tell us.
Tell us why they are not taxing you.
But building into that, I think Professor is alluding to the canons of taxation, equity, efficiency, also the man of correction and the rest. And the people in charge of levying taxes in this country have moved more to indirect taxes. And currently 80% of our GDP, I think, is concentrated in Kampala, and then the other 6 lower middle income districts. But when you go,
they tax consumption, not income.
Yes, 80% of our revenue collection is Kampala concentrated. And if you are saying also they are taxing people's beliefs and conscience, we also know how Kampala votes.
That should explain it.
That's a new dimension.
So just right there.
Yes.
Do you think these first of all, the new taxes that are around, do you think they would be in position to aid economic recovery, especially from
Yes, but to conclude my point, Kampala, Jinja, Masaka, Mpigi, Mukono, those are the other districts that are in lower middle income status with Mbarara. So 6 out of 7 districts that have attained middle income status in Uganda also voted opposition. So I don't know whether there is a correlation between incomes and people's thoughts
tax experts should
and
look
conscience.
Political economy of taxation now.
need to venture this into that also.
But going into the proposed taxes, we have the unfortunate tax on internet when schools are closed, when all our children are learning via Zoom, when the world has gone digital, when everybody must work digitally, and the role of the government would be to enable the sector of ICT, which is one of the 3 drivers of NDP3, because we have ICT, tourism and agriculture. So you have a new burden emerging on the ICT sector, together with burdensome regulations that are not enabling. The legal regime for ICT usage in this country is aiming at controlling dissenting voices and people's thoughts than enabling a sector for a digital economy and a digitalized world. So the political thinking is heavy on power retention in whatever they do, including taxation and the waivers we are talking about. We saw a time when there was bailout of what you would think are billionaires in town running to get free cash handouts from a poor taxpayer. And they were all claiming refunds from what they put in the campaign for the president. So you have our political thoughts inclined on power retention and supporting the networks that keeping in power, while controlling and deflating the others that are maybe voicing out issues.
And undermining innovations.
Yes.
We are talking about IT innovations. We are talking about innovation in technology and innovation in ideas, but you are heavily taxing the internet and the other social media where children would be learning how to be innovative in new scientific discoveries.
Yes. So the concept of social media, for example, to government is not innovation, is not e-commerce, is not e-knowledge. It is about noisemakers talking ill of government. And that drives the policies they make on the sector, forgetting all the beautiful things that the other countries have empowered to rejuvenate and reactivate their economies, as well as innovations and creations. So this is a big problem we have as a country, whereby you are looking at closing the taps that can aid opposition and the loss of power, other than developing a nation and creating space for prosperity. So I think really that's the overall driving sector. But looking at our revenue base with the shrinking economies because of COVID, I think really our government took a departure approach from what other progressive democracies are doing. Other countries are concentrating more on social recovery, socio-economic recovery with stimulus packages. For us, we are looking at milking the few recovering economies out of a pandemic to get money out of them and expand the budget corruption. Because if you are saying you are running, for example, you are running a COVID budget, because this year, whether we had a second wave or not, government should have budgeted for the pandemic as well as economic recovery from a pandemic. What was the basis of creating new administrative units? What did it have to do with recovering lives and livelihoods of the people out of a pandemic? You are expanding parliament. You are creating
Ministries,
ministers and cities that cannot even, do not qualify to be called a name as a city. So what is the approach of government vis-a-vis the ideals that they should address? I find that they are moving on two parallel paths. The president is hell-bent on entrenching himself further and rewarding his voting blocks and patronage networks, whereas leaving the citizen to walk a lonely journey on the path of struggling with the effects of the pandemic, both on their lives and livelihoods.
Interesting. Patrick, what do you think with the new taxes? Do you think the possible aid to the economic recovery from where we've been from the pandemic?
Yeah, okay. Partially yes, partially no. Let me look at us taxing now businesses, because the target here for URA is extremely high, because it has increased from what that said previously. So it has increased now. I think last time their target was 21, so they have gone now to 22.
And that was the last financial year?
Yes.
Sorry, if you don't mind. This is what Sarah was saying. Extremely unrealistic, because quite clearly, if the last financial year was last year, COVID has been here. You know the economy will have been shrinking.
That's where it gets tricky, because the projections for growth is equally not so positive, 4.3. And if you look at the sectors now that contribute to our GDP, you look at agriculture, 23%, you look at industry, 27%, services, 44%. Now, what do we really need to do to energize these sectors so that we have the money we intend to get from them?
And so therefore the focus, if you don't mind, would have been on stimulus packages, number one. And number two, although this program has substantially criticized the budget deficit, it would have been understandable, especially if we were content that actually there's no budget corruption, that at this time you would rather have a slightly widened deficit if the monies were targeted towards those sectors, vis-a-vis saying that, well, we give some kind of mini heavens for particular sectors over, maybe give them 18 months period of grace or something like that. In my opinion, that's how we're probably working on it.
Yeah. So to me, what I think government would have done better, we needed to depart from, because you see SMEs are very many in this country. And Uganda is one of the countries where startup is really extremely high. We are ranked like number 1 almost in terms of startup. Again, these startups collapse.
The death rate is
extremely high. They don't get to celebrate their first birthdays. So, and yet we are looking at solving the issues of unemployment here. And as we solve the issues of unemployment, we need to nurture these SMEs to a point where they can work on their own and contribute meaningfully to the tax basket. Because if someone registers today and he has not even done any meaningful business, COVID is impacting, and tomorrow they say pay this tax, chances are they're just going to close. And yet we need them. So a stimulus package which really directs to these SMEs would be critical in our budget. But again, if you look at some of the proposals that URA has brought on board, like taxing the fish more, I think that's
and property tax.
That's a measure which it's new, and I believe, yes, they are going to get some money, but the challenge comes in the livelihoods of the fishermen. These men and women who spend all the nights in the lake to fish, are they going to benefit from it? Because we need to regulate such a market. Because this is a product which is extremely expensive, but the person who spends the whole night fishing to get it, how much does that person earn? Is he spending all that time?
But I thought the interest of about the lake is not the fish itself, but the other product inside there.
You need to look at that person who goes and
how
fishes.
How do you get to the inside product? You have to get to the fish.
We need a regulation in that industry whereby you say, if this is what you have gotten, a fish more shouldn't go below this per kilo. Now that gives a starter. Much as you're going to tax, the other person who goes fishing also benefits, because the biggest beneficiaries here are the middlemen who come and pick it up. Yes, government is going to tax them, but the tax rate may not even be that high, is like 8%. But what's the value of the product they are exporting? So now those are the kind of discussions we need to see. The tax should equally benefit the common person.
Sector.
There is a sector we have not looked at. Actually, the problem is, okay, we need to widen the tax base, but we also need to target plugging the holes through which there are financial outflows. But 3, we need to look at areas which have, I don't know, been given the opportunity or the license to evade tax. From the reliable sources now, export revenue from gold in Uganda have now exceeded agriculture. But you look at the tax of gold, 5%, when the exports of gold are very, 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 very high. So who are those involved in the gold trade? Can somebody find out? Can the civil society find out? Can the opposition find out? Who are exporting gold?
And from where?
From where? Let's leave it for now.
You're being very generous.
But how come that exports of gold are going very high, are going up, but the revenue tax collection from gold is almost not moving? It means that is an industry that needs a political economy assessment to see where there is tax injustice. Gold now exports we get more revenue in this country from gold exports than coffee. But you can hardly see he's saying it is only 5% contribution to revenue.
No, that's the tax they're levying.
Oh, they levy 5%. And yet gold is a very valuable commodity. So who is it that is in the tax policy that exempts gold taxation,
or even determines
Is it?
How was it determined? What
Is
criteria
it
was
possible
used?
that those are the very people who are
Those are children of the rich.
tax decision makers who are actually involved in tax exports?
Yeah.
Maybe we look at that one. Yeah?
The DRS.
Whatever the case may be, let the politicians, let the analysts look at the tax industry, the gold industry, and see why gold is not taxed as it is supposed to be taxed. Where it is coming from, that's another discussion. So, actually, I think politicians, the government, actually is turning a blind eye. Don't tell me government doesn't know that there is there is gold export in this country, and it is not paying the tax it is supposed to be paying. Don't tell me that these big companies, corporations, that through which we lose a lot of financial outflows, that they don't know them. It is that they have the capacity to oil those who are in tax administration or in tax policy. And therefore, we have got distortions. The president has been talking about economic distortions. Let's talk about tax distortions. Where are tax distortions? Can we have next budget a discussion about tax distortions and squarely look at the financial outflows? I am told the financial outflows are more than $1 trillion. And then we are missing out a lot of tax through tax exemptions. Then we are missing out a lot of taxes through those sectors that have not been taxed in a justice way. The example I have given you is gold, which is hardly taxed, for heaven's sake. If gold has boomed, gold exports in Uganda have boomed, never mind where it comes from. How come that we don't tax it accordingly?
Just on the gold, Sarah, let us try to go a little onto the real politics of the 100 days. Yeah, what are your predictions of the new government?
You know, the new government started on 12th May. They have already lost 30 days with no cabinet. I think Parliament is still struggling to approve the stadium-size cabinet. And they've reached maybe about 60-something ministers. So we have lost 30 days with no cabinet. What has been done, I think there has been only one address after swearing in. State of Nation address, budget address, and then the COVID pandemic address that put us into partial lockdown with no tangible measures that the government is taking. And now we know that we have no capacity to treat. We have no capacity to test, and the citizens are on their own, buying medicines from pharmacies and self-treating a pandemic. So those are the first 30 days of the government. What do we then expect in this next 70 days? The ideal thing to do for this regime is to focus on 4 things to get us out of the pandemic crisis. One is massive immunization with a target of 70% eligible population. Next is massive testing and treatment with the capacity and efficient medical care for those who are sick and battling the pandemic. The third is the putting measures for humane enforcement of standard operating procedures until the world is declared COVID-free. Because we are in a situation where we are today, because we relaxed and thought the pandemic had ended, yet the pandemic was still going on in other countries, in other parts of the world. And this is a disease that spreads through one carrier to another, airborne and the rest. So I think that relaxation was not necessary. We need to follow the standard operating procedures until World Health Organization declares the world free of COVID. And the fourth strategy is saving livelihoods of the people and revamping the economy as we battle the pandemic, because countries or nations must go on. If you look at our immunization efforts, I think the doses available in the country, are they even more than 1 million? We were being told of 900 something doses, part of them stolen at the height of the crisis. And yesterday we received a donation of 175,000 or so. So we are relying on handouts in a country that claims to be stable in order to secure herd immunity for our population. There are two options of developing herd immunity for this pandemic. One is natural herd immunity, which Tanzania risked. We don't know how they are faring, but they risked the natural herd immunity under Magufuli, and later he was
But not consciously done.
Yes, and later he was also claimed by the same pandemic.
So in a way, he was a sacrifice to the nation.
No, I don't. I think he was careless. I don't want to call it a sacrifice. I'm sorry, really, because the leadership, offering leadership, is not a charitable or sitting in a circus and entertaining people. You must take responsible decisions. The second procedure is immunity through massive immunization. I know that the Africa vaccines acquisition task teams are doing all it takes to make sure countries that have money and can procure vaccination are not relying on handouts like we are. Botswana has procured enough vaccination for all their eligible population through the African vaccine acquisition task teams. Uganda, we are folding our hands and waiting for donations and handouts from the COVAX facility and other well-wishers. We should put aside money, calculate the money required to buy doses for 70% of eligible population for immunization 18 years and above, procure that money. If we are to get donations, let donations cover the 30% to help us achieve 100% immunization of eligible categories like Botswana. But this readiness of waiting, and we are celebrating and launching 170 doses in a pandemic, I think really we need to, we can do better than that.
Thank you. Joseph, right there, what's your prediction for the new government currently? For the 100 days.
I don't have miracles to offer. So I honestly don't know. I think whatever happens is going to be determined by what the next 30 or so days has for us in store in terms of how damaging this pandemic is, or whether or not the 42 days granted, manages to help us check this. Now, considering the state in which we are, the incapacity of our health services, including the private sector health providers who are literally, almost criminally, subjecting Ugandans to the excess, ugliest face of capitalism in terms of dealing with this pandemic, rather than sort of joining the state, or the state getting them to be part of the process of saving lives. They're basically busy reaping our people, noting and knowing very well that there are many people who right now fear going literally to test because they don't know whether or not they can afford, they don't know what else happens as a matter of implication, knowing that there are many people who are dying and we actually don't know what the circumstances, the situations are. It is very difficult. So I think this wave of the pandemic is going to very much determine what happens. And I'm just afraid that the state will continue to use this as an excuse to wrap up and cover up itself in the first 100 days. So it's going to be very, very dwarfed. And beyond that, if anything, they're actually very likely going to use it to determine what happens over the next remaining 4-point-something years, considering the fact that wherever we came in from last year leading to elections, what happens after the elections and what happens up to where we are at the moment, we really genuinely have no clue that there's a genuine focus, one, for sufficient readiness for a buffer to the economy, let alone economic recovery, and then two, no clear program on how to support our communities in terms of social services provisions under pandemic. So I'm really not quite sure whether there's anything magical that is likely going to come out of this, except, as I said, lamentations and blame. And Mr. Museveni is going to blame everybody else, including how you refused to wash your hands as if you had water and soap, and how it was the fault of everybody else. And you'll be surprised, he may even go ahead and say that these private health providers, I can close them tomorrow, when many of these health providers are part of what Ndebesa is talking about, the people who are given tax havens and in many cases given allocations to make sure that not only do they evade taxes, but maybe some of the hospitals they've got are spaces where they're given free land.
Interesting, Joseph. Doctor, I want to. It looks like the pandemic is really now the main driver of what we are seeing today. But do you think the interests and wishes and aspirations of the common man will be met in these 100 days and going forward?
Thank you. I think, well, in 100 days, there isn't much that can be done, considering given our resource envelope. We are going to get more of the same anyway in the next 100 days. But maybe if we can reframe the question, what do I advise? My advice would be that we need to do in these 100 days, since they are initial days, to strengthen state capacity. Strengthen state capacity by way of creating institutions and giving them maybe a legal backing to strengthen and transform the state. If I was the chief advisor of the president, I would think that we set up an independent body, give it the mandate and give it autonomy to work by whatever name, this independent body to do monitoring and evaluation of service delivery. Because I think the Prime Minister's office has not done us justice to coordinate, monitor, and evaluate service delivery. If we could set up an independent body, staff it with well-qualified people and independent thinkers who have got the skills and the capacity to do evaluation, to monitor and evaluate government performance, independent of political patronage, and evaluate and quarterly continue to feedback, to give a feedback to the state, to say this ministry, this sector, this program has not performed according to expectations, and this is what should be done. We have got very many experts of monitoring and evaluation, independent of government influence, independent of state capture, and they would strengthen state capacity to deliver services. What actually is lacking in this banana republic, is it banana or cassava republic, whatever we want to call it, is organizational capacity. Because they can see even when they are appointing ministers, they are not concerned about organizational capacity to capacitate the state, to transform the state, to deliver. What they are appointing people, most people with due respect, is just people who are going to sing the manifesto. A manifesto is a political statement to capture votes. It is not necessarily about state efficiency and effectiveness. So we need an independent body to come up with monitoring and evaluation and feedback to the ministries. The various ministries have got monitors and evaluators, but remember these ones are under political supervision. When they talk, they will say, we can transfer you. What are you talking? How can you say that we have not achieved the manifesto by a 90%? That's not acceptable. You get it? You get me? But if you had an independent body like we have the Auditor General's office, who do not fear, have no fear to say what they have found out, and the government gave them that leeway and said, without fear or favor, evaluate ministries, so that we know Minister Y, Permanent Secretary Y, Department Y is underperforming, and there are clear sanctions, political sanctions now, administrative sanctions, not necessarily legal judicial sanctions, but administrative political sanctions, that if you are an underperformer, you will not become, we shall even have a reshuffle, a mid-term reshuffle, and when you are a minister, you go. And if you are a permanent secretary, you are shuffled or you are retired in public interest. I think that pressure would induce people to perform and to follow up what is going on. But hitherto, it is a matter of making sure that you make statements to the effect that the manifesto has achieved 88% for political gimmicks, but not real service delivery. Because if it was service delivery, you go randomly and ask the population about who trusts government institutions, who trusts Mulago, who trusts the police, who trusts Makerere University if you want, who trusts the Ministry of Finance, who trusts Parliament, who trusts a certain health center that they can deliver. When you ask that general perception, you will be told that actually more than 90% of people mistrust those government institutions in terms of goods and service delivery. So how can we objectively...
Even they themselves don't trust themselves.
The president says these parasites, parasites don't perform. He has declared everybody, civil servants are parasites, the ministers are parasites, police are parasites, everybody is a parasite. Who can evaluate that parasitism objectively by figures, and then the appointing authority takes measures? Let the appointing authority, by the way, not hiding. Those are the things we inherited. When NRM came into power, people who had just come to office, myself included who had just graduated, we are now retiring at 60. Therefore, 99% of the people who are manning public service were recruited under this regime. So there is no question of we inherited them. Those people are not inherited. They were created. They are the NRA descendants. They are the Bazukuru. How can we make these Bazukuru work other than pumping them up, propping them up just for political gimmick?
Thank you very much. I think now right there, I think the minister should pick some leaf from there and possibly have the new premier. The premier should pick that and try to implement. I think it's something we could take on, as from that docket. But we're tending into our final closure, and I would want to get to Patrick. I need you to just give us your parting shots from the budget and the new taxes.
And the new Chisanja, if at all it is new. Or the old new.
The old new.
I think my parting shot would be, as citizens, we need to interest ourselves in the workings of governments. We shouldn't really keep away, because whatever government implements, it implements using our resources. We are the ones who contribute to that pool, so we shouldn't shy by highlighting, monitoring these services that are being offered, and where there are gaps, we should also have the mandate to raise it out, flag it out, so that government also gets to know that much as they're delivering a given service in a specific area, they are not up to task. There are certain gaps that needs to be closed. So as me, I would really interest very many citizens to really put interest in the monitoring of services, as well when the budget starts for the upcoming financial year, the priority settings, because we shall be having the sub-county budget conferences, the district conferences, and even right at the parish when they're setting the priorities, they need to involve themselves so that these duty bearers don't sit and plan without getting their input. At least they should show interest and participate in all those spaces. Yeah.
And not be participated. Because you can be participated thinking you are participating.
Right there, as you also give your parting shots.
My parting shots will be on participation now. I agree with him that politics or management of public affairs should not be left only to the politicians. We should all participate through various spaces where we can find them, or even those ones given by government. But, caution, you might be participated instead of participating. What do I mean? They will have a budget conference to legitimize the process and the regime in which they will say, before you enter the budget conference room, you will sign in a book. And when you challenge them, they will say, don't you see 50 citizens signed on interest? And that means the budget was participatory. When actually the contribution was inconsequential. It was just the business as usual, but they make you legitimize the whole exercise of participation. That's what we mean by being participated instead of participating. In Kiswahili they call it kushirikishwa. We are going to be kushirikishwa. We have been kushirikishwa instead of participating.
My call to the new, I don't know how to call it, the new government, because the new term, 5 years of President Museveni as he makes his 4 decades in power. In his State of Nation address, as well as the inaugural speech on swearing in, he talked about socio-economic transformation, which was his point number 3 in the 10 points program. So for 35 years, he has been talking about socio-economic transformation and driving Uganda into middle-income economy, with no clear strategies or serious actions in that direction. He also highlighted the issue of regional integration, knowing very well that 3 borders in the East African community countries are closed by member states, including his own, Uganda-Rwanda border. So as he drums up this political sloganeering, since he has promised action, can we see action? If your drive for socio-economic transformation is through regional integration to expand the market base for the people, can he take a move, a serious move, to end the bickering between Rwanda and Uganda? Because that conflict is just between the 2 leaders. Can he also, now as a leader of the federation, make sure that Rwanda, Burundi, and Rwanda DRC borders are also open? Because how do you federate with closed borders? Can we really, even before, I know the committees are running around to consult on the East African Constitution, how do you talk of federation when a rat cannot cross from one country to another? Who is going to federate with who? So I think we need leaders who don't just talk without action or tangible direction of things. Let this term be for action, as he has declared.
Talking of action, Joseph, your final parting shots.
No, I really don't know. I don't know whether these guys can be advised. This is a tired regime. 40 years is a very long time. 30 years is a very long time. It's 35. The beginning of the conversation clearly suggested that we're in a very difficult situation. But of course, what can we pick up of this? I'm not sure we're going to pick up anything from State House. But public servants watching, those non-political guys, those guys who are 30, 40, possibly even 50, slightly as energetic as I am, you just give some thought to some of the conversations which has been said. So, look, that it is very clear that we are going towards a program-based budget approach. We cannot hold it, we cannot change it to appear. Let the thinkers, people whom we pay to think on our behalf, take stock of this. Let them ring your phone number and take some of the points that Dr. Ndebesa and particularly Patrick have suggested beyond my usual lamentations here with Sarah. Beyond that, I think this guy should remember that when you set up a budget, you're doing it really as a part of accounting thing from your pocket for the children of your country, the children of your household, which is basically us, the citizens. We clearly articulated many issues here, the SMEs, but the SMEs is not about the SMEs. As I said, the SMEs are they trickle down to the poorest guys who can't afford meals, and these guys are very real today. I would rather those are the kind of things that we see. But my word again is, what happens over the next 1 month? in this COVID spite. I'm very, very worried that people are fearing to go to hospitals because of what is being reported, the huge cost burden to the ordinary citizen. And I question, where did the monies that we borrowed, where did the monies that we collected go? What has government done with that? For me, as Ochieno from Uganda People's Congress, going forward, I will hold these guys accountable to Ugandans who died needlessly.
Thank you very much, Joseph. You had to end with that. Thank you very much, citizens, for following. Possibly you hinted about also on the issue of medication and also self-medication. It's something that is really bothering all of us here, and people are doing this all over. I think it's important that people have to be cautious on self-medication and also try to seek out these medical expertise from your doctors to ensure that, you consult and get the right medication. We need to do at least health facilities.
We are jokers. You find a whole constituency has no doctor, you consult a doctor. You consult which doctor? Because they are everywhere. You consult the doctors who are there.
Consultations here. Kindly.
No, that's a crisis.
From Dr. Ndebesa, also kushirikishwa. Kindly don't be kushirikishwa there. Be part of these processes. Actively be part. Be part of the processes that are happening around your environment, your communities, and the governance around you. Be part of this conversation always. Every Friday we're here, and this is what you can take out of here. It's the best of it that you can take out of here. Be part of these conversations. Also follow on our social media pages, the chat show UG, this Twitter hashtag. Also on YouTube, Civic Space TV, and on Facebook, Instagram, we are right there. Kindly be part of these discussions. To my panelists, thank you very much for joining me and enlightening our citizens around this area of and the pandemic that is ravaging us.
Citizens, not subjects.
They are citizens. This space is for citizens. Thank you very much for following, and we meet next Friday. Yeah.